Rosenfeld of the Solar Rights Alliance. His presentation is the net metering policy that puts consumers at the center. Dave Rosenfeld is the executive director for Solar Rights Alliance, a nonprofit association of California solar users, where they believe in the right to make energy from the sun without unreasonable interference from utilities. He has over 2 decades of experience in organizing, campaigning, policy making, fundraising, and management experience aimed at empowering people to better determine the direction of their lives and our country. He is an expert social change leader working to build movements and institutions that expand freedom, liberty, and justice. Dave Rosenfeld, yay!
All right, thank you, Sean. It's awesome. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, it's a little muffled, and but you're okay. And
all right.
Can you share your slides? Share your screen?
Yeah. So we'll do that right now.
There you go. If you just move in just that amount a little bit closer to your microphone, it works out.
Okay, very good. This is my trick for avoiding internet freezes. Okay, thank you so much, Sean, and everybody here for entertaining me coming for a bit. I'll do 15 minutes of just overview, and then we can do lots of questions. And just thank you for everything you do. You guys do really important work. Make sure people have a home that's a good home and a home that's good for the planet. So I think a lot of people are familiar with what's going on, but I'm gonna act like maybe you need a refresher. And so forgive it if it's a little bit repetitive. We're gonna talk about just where things stand and then what we need to do, just as Sean said. So I run the Solar Rights Alliance. That's my main thing. That's the Association of California Solar Users. And I also coordinate the Save California Solar Coalition, which is it's now over 600 nonprofit organizations, elected officials, cities, and schools. We can put the list in the chat once we get off the slides, and you can see it's really mind-blowing, just the number of folks that have come forward to protect California solar. Just quickly, why do we need more rooftop solar? I'm going to do this really fast, but I always think this is just good as a reminder. I think there's a bunch of reasons why the 1.3 million solar rooftops that we have is a good beginning, but that the goal should be, how do we get solar into the hands of millions, like literally millions of working and middle-class people, homeowners and renters, schools, businesses, farms, the whole 9 yards. And so it's a few reasons. One is just that people ought to have control over their energy bills. Especially if we're asking people to electrify, then we owe it to people to give them a little slice of control. And we just should not assume that it always used to be, this is the way things ought to be. It's always, you can't do anything about it. Some people are just gonna have to choose between their electricity bill and paying their groceries, and we're just gonna have to give them some assistance, and hopefully it works out for the best. Well, now we have this technology, and so we ought to be just trying to arm people, as many people as possible, with the technology so they can just take that control right back and keep that wealth in their families and their communities. The second reason is blackouts. Right now the state has no systemic, scalable solution to protecting the public from recurring, massive, large-scale blackouts. And that's because we're reliant on long-distance power lines to deliver most of our power. That's not going to change completely, but if we can scale up rooftop solar and battery storage, make batteries standard, and keep scaling it up so that we have a critical mass of solar and batteries in every community, we can stitch those together into virtual power plants and microgrids so that if the larger power lines have to go down for one reason or another, the communities themselves can keep their critical facilities open at the home level and at the critical facility level. So we need more rooftop solar in order to charge those batteries. Third thing is, is just climate change. The state themselves says that to hit their decarbonization goals, we need to triple the amount of wind and solar. We need to 8x battery storage. And we need to do it of all forms of solar and wind, both large scale and behind the meter. Well, what happens if you get rid of behind the meter? Then you're going to have to make that up with large scale. And there's theoretically enough open space, but as there's siting issues, there's transmission line issues, there's just the state's goals of protecting open space. There's what Native Americans would have to say and do have to say about developing on their sacred lands. And so it's going to be really hard to be able to do decarbonization if we're mostly relying on large scale energy and we're not doing any rooftop solar. And some projections say that it's literally impossible. The fourth and final reason why we need more rooftop solar is that it makes the whole grid cheaper and saves every single ratepayer money, whether or not they have solar. And so the best and most detailed energy modeling that has been done in the United States for California found they did two scenarios. One where California tries to hit its decarbonization goals with just large-scale renewables and batteries, large-scale batteries. And then another scenario where we try to hit our decarbonization goals with large-scale renewables and batteries, but also lots and lots and lots of rooftop solar and batteries, and also community solar. And lo and behold, the model found that the latter scenario, the one with both large and rooftop with lots and lots of batteries, is $120 billion cheaper over the next 30 years than if we just do it with large scale. So that's $300 per ratepayer per year. And so why in the world wouldn't we do it that way? So that's the case for. And then, this isn't just some future projection. In 2018 alone, the state scaled back 20 massive power line projects that was going to get charged to ratepayers at the tune of $2.6 billion that didn't get charged to ratepayers because those power lines didn't need to get built. And the state attributed that to both rooftop solar and energy efficiency. So this is happening right now and could be force multiplied if we continue to grow rooftop solar and battery storage. So then the thing is that the utilities don't want to do that. They want to increase the cost of going solar, and they have succeeded in their year-long campaign at convincing the CPUC. And so the CPUC last month made this terrible proposal that you all are probably familiar with, but just for posterity's sake, it includes these components: a solar tax that averages $57 a month for residential. It's a little bit, we'll just talk about residential as a proxy, and it stinks for everything. But $57 a month just for putting solar panels on your rooftop, an 80% cut in the net metering credit that would apply across the board, across all kinds of solar development, and then also rolling back the protection for existing solar users from 20 years to 15 years. Now, I can talk about the low income provision, but why don't we save that for the questions, because I'm going to assume this is a high information audience. And then if you want to know more about how those provisions stink as well, I'm happy to talk about it. But this is the basic thing. Solar becomes unaffordable under this scenario. It just doesn't work. This is very drastic. We predict basically the market goes off a cliff. In addition to just closing off what I was saying before, forget it. The future of rooftop solar and batteries is over. 50 to 60,000 jobs are at risk as well. We know that this whole thing is happening at the CPUC, but we should not be fooled. This is all about Governor Newsom. He appoints these people. This is happening on his watch. This is a man who has basically said climate change is his big thing. Electrification is his big thing. He's on the hook for showing that he's willing to stand up to PG&E. And some of the biggest and most salient problems right now among voters is rising energy bills that are unsustainable and blackouts. And he has said that he wants to help with those kinds of things. This proposal is the counter of everything that he has promised to do. And so we believe everything comes down to what Governor Newsom is going to do. Now, obviously, the utilities have a different story. I think you're familiar. They say that rooftop solar actually increases the costs of the grid, and that, in fact, is responsible for rising bills because they say rooftop solar users don't pay their fair share of the grid. And, of course, that's bunk because the primary thing that's actually the reason why we're paying out of our nose for electricity is long-distance power lines. Ratepayers are getting charged out of their nose. Utilities get a guaranteed profit for every dollar that they spend building long-distance power lines. Rooftop solar, in contrast, like I said before, reduces the cost of building and maintaining long-distance power lines, and that's precisely why they're going after rooftop solar, because it's good for everybody, including ratepayers, but it cuts into utility profits. And by the way, it doesn't take it all away because we're going to need long-distance power lines and large-scale solar, but the utilities are greedy and used to controlling everything because they're a monopoly, and so that is why they want to take rooftop solar off the table, because they cannot possibly share the table with anybody if it cuts into their profits even a little bit. So then to the actual reason why I am up here, let's hope that my slide goes to the next thing. The public is very much with us, poll after poll. Like I said, coalition is almost complete consensus among the nonprofit community with some exceptions, but for the most part, 120,000 members of the public. Our goal, keep solar and batteries growing and get it in the hands of millions and millions of Californians, both homeowners and renters, and just make it more affordable and get the batteries more affordable too, so that becomes standard. So what do we have to do? And this is the meat of it all, so I'm going to run through it. So the governor has said that changes need to be made. Today was supposed to be the day that the CPUC was going to vote on their awful decision. It wasn't on the agenda today, so they punted it. Instead, 500 people showed up to the CPUC today. Some of you might have testified, and if you did, good. I think they're still listening to public comment. And it's like, I think only like out of hundreds and hundreds of people, there's like one person that spoke in favor of the CPUC proposal. So they're at the drawing board, and right now is the triangulation phase. Governor Newsom, no doubt, behind closed doors, is with his advisors and key people at the CPUC trying to figure out what they're going to do. And what we have to do right now is come forward and be really, really strong about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So here's what I'm proposing, and what we're recommending is the acceptable position. Number one, no solar tax, not at all. We should never, ever, ever be penalizing people for good behavior. We should do a carbon tax. That might be a nice thing to think about. People might have different opinions about that, and that's fine. But we should never tax people for putting solar panels on their rooftop, not 1 cent. So that's one really important red line. Number two is that the net metering credit just has to make solar pencil out. And you all know about how these, thin and these margins are. And so rather than kind of looking at some stupid spreadsheet that, some consultant came up with that basically is also a consultant for the utilities, and, kind of working out in a laboratory what the net metering credit ought to be and to make it work for the utilities, what we ought to do is just look at the consumer data that we already have that can tell you exactly what the net metering credit needs to be so that it pencils out for middle and working class Californians and folks like you who are trying to bring affordable housing to working class Californians. So it's quite simple. And if you want to make any changes, it's fine, but they got to be super gradual, and it always has to be tethered with the consumer at the center. What we also should be doing is, no matter what we do, holding the line at net metering 2 for renters and nonprofits, folks on the CARE program, and folks who live in low-income neighborhoods. And in fact, two major fixes that we need to do is one, we need to make sure that virtual net metering is available to all multifamily homes all across the state. Right now, they're limited in, depending on neighborhood and census tract, the CPUC only allows them in a small number of developments. And we just think virtual net metering should be available in any multifamily home context because working class people live in every single kind of neighborhood. And to kind of limit it is effectively just sort of reinforcing segregation and ghettoization of low-income people, and that's stupid. So we should just allow it everywhere. In addition, right now, the CPUC lets utilities actually only give folks on the CARE program who have solar a partial net metering credit, which is ridiculous because that's like saying because you're poor, your extra energy is worth less than somebody who isn't poor, and that's insulting and also completely untrue. So folks who are on the CARE program who have solar should be allowed the full net metering credit. And for those folks, we think it's just literally they need to stay on net metering too, no changes. But for everybody, it's got a pencil. That's the bottom line. And then the third is just you don't break promises to existing solar users. 20-year protections is reasonable. That's how long the asset lasts. That's what people were promised. And if we break that promise, you can basically kiss anyone wanting to go solar goodbye, even if you fix the above problems, because nobody's going to trust the government really with anything. And people don't trust the government as it is. So why in the world would you want to make that worse? So those are the basics. And obviously there's more that we'll talk about. But for those of you who have been participating in the campaign, it's been a hell of a campaign. 3,000 solar workers, solar supporters, and solar users marched in the streets of Los Angeles and San Francisco just 2 weeks ago. There was 500 people dialed in to go give the CPUC public testimony today. And so we have a lot of work to do in the next, really frankly, week or 2 weeks is where we think basically the decision is going to get cooked and then ultimately get voted on sometime next month. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll kind of leave it open and we take questions.
Bravo, bravo. Thank you, Dave. You've done so much work leading the narrative and the fight. So a question, there's people doing their comments here. So one of the questions that's been going back is Tom Cabot. Where did his comment go? Oh, there it is. He's like, hey, instead of a solar tax, could we request a 10 cents per amp of main service connection charge to all customers, not just solar customers? So it means like your panel sizing, which is about your consumption. You know, like for every 100 amps of panel, you can use 16 of them usually, unless you have a larger bus bar, but basically it's usually 16 amps of the 100 can have solar backflowing through. So it's really a very small amount of this power that's moving back compared to the power you can pull out of the grid. You can pull 100, you can only put 16 in. So this idea of a solar tax that's based upon, this says this has us customers pay for the level of grid services our connection allows us to cause on the grid. It also encouraged efficient electrification while not discouraging rooftop solar or batteries, like its less peak draw is efficient electrification. But do you have any, what do you think about this idea of like shifting the burden over to great impacts as a result of peak consumption, sort of like how commercial loads are currently now?
Yeah, I think what I would say is I maybe I haven't thought a ton about this. I'll be totally honest, and I think let me tell you what I'm most interested in this kind of like, okay, what do we do?
Yeah,
Is so the root of the problem, the reason why we're paying out of our nose is because of the way utilities are incentivized to make their profits. So the deal is they don't actually make a lot of money selling the electricity. They make some, but not a lot, because it's all third-party developers and it's mostly in and out. So it's all about the power, the transmission and distribution. And every dollar that they spend building and maintaining it, the CPUC allows them to collect a 7 to 10% profit. And the oversight is very, very bad. And so more or less, they're writing a blank check to themselves, at least half the time. And obviously, we need that infrastructure, so it's not like you want to throw it out. But the way they make their money is just screwed up. Like it's just like if you're just logical, forget that corporations are not people; they're just machines or drones that exist to basically maximize their profits. So if you take sort of the anger about PG&E out of the picture, you just go PG&E is behaving in a very logical way by trying to take rooftop solar off the table because it reduces the need for the infrastructure. Well, of course, that's anti-social behavior because shouldn't we be incentivizing them to act in ways that are going to, be to the grid's advantage? And so the root of the whole problem isn't necessarily how we build things to people. The root of the problem is what kind of utility system do we need? Now, obviously, some people will go, well, let's make them a public utility. And that's part of it, maybe, although SMUD and LADWP have hardly been shining examples of this whole thing. But maybe that's part of the equation. But the other part of the equation is just going, what do you reward the utility on? Like, what is the reward? The reward should be basically built around reliability of service. It should be around keeping costs relatively flat. And that's pretty much, and also the speed with which they decarbonize. And, you can create a system, and Hawaii is experimenting with this as one state. And I think that's kind of what's more interesting to me is just like, how can you actually just get the utilities in a place and the regulators in a place where the incentives are kind of going in the right direction so that we're not just constantly in this pitched battle where the inherent interest of the special interest is just against that of the consumer. So I know it's a non-answer, but it's just what I'm concerned with. And I think this rooftop solar fight is a proxy fight for that in some ways, because what we're saying is that whatever you think, the system has to include customer-owned and sited generation and storage and sharing it. So no matter what, we're going to insist that this is a part of the electricity system, and we have data that shows that this actually makes the whole system cheaper. So you better get the rest of the system together, Bob, or else the peasants with the pitchforks are coming for you. And so that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, and we don't need to basically think about how do we structure rates so that they're equitable and fair and incentivize the right thing. It's just, to me, it's sort of like the fourth question down in terms of like, how are we going to get to the root of the problem?
So if this right now is going to come out of a backdoor discussion, we are here all trying to speak loudly, hopefully, and you're organizing a unified voice. Well, what is the process by which we get a whole new proposal that comes out? Assume any change to it essentially means it's a whole new proposal in terms of like public review timelines and such. They get extra 30 days or some amount of time. So they'll come out with a new proposal. It'll look better and it'll happen. We don't know when. And then the next step after that is if it's not a very palatable proposal, it's a lawsuit, or does it go to legislation next? I'm sort of curious strategically what happens.
Yeah. All right. So this is a great question, Sean. This is the question, by the way. So I think this is the most important question for those of us that really, really care about the outcome. So right now, something is happening behind closed doors. We don't know exactly what. Although I'm going to tell you what I think it's going to be, and then I'll go to the thing. But so something will get proposed, reproposed, and like you said, there'll be some window of time, depending on when it gets proposed. Like if it gets proposed next week, we could see a vote at the CPUC's next meeting, which will be on February 10th. If it doesn't come out next week, then what it probably means is they're aiming to have a vote happen on February 24th, which is the CPUC meeting after that. And it wouldn't happen in between that. So it's basically either February 10th or February 24th. And it kind of depends if they put out something next week or the week after. Now, obviously, they could push it out into March or April. We really don't think that's going to happen because the CPUC is also under a lot of pressure from the legislature to get this done. And we're pretty sure that everybody just wants to get this done. So let's make that the assumption. So then what's going to happen, let's pretend that next week something gets floated, and this might come in the form of a statement from the governor. It might come in the form of literally a formal proposal that comes out from the CPUC. And if it's not acceptable, then what we're going to have to do is just organize like hell, basically take everything we're doing and just escalate it yet again, and create so much political pressure that the governor basically goes, well, that trial balloon sure didn't work, so we got to do something better, right? And then you can rest assured if we succeed in doing that, then between the time that they make some kind of alternate proposal and the time that a vote happens, we'll get what we want on that day. And so that's all we really need to focus on right now, because that's real. And what I think is going to happen, by the way, is they're going to come out and they're going to go, good news, everybody, we've heard you. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a $20 solar tax, and we're going to only cut the net metering credit by 50%. And we're going to honor grandfathering. And the problem is that would also send the market off a cliff, because actually we know from consumer data that even a solar tax of $5 will send the market off a cliff. And we know that drastic changes to the net metering credit of really more than like even 10% in any kind of given year, something that's very, very drastic like that, sends the market off a cliff. And so it'll look like, hey, we just split the baby. Look at us, King Solomon, but it'll be terrible. Assuming that happens, then everyone that cares about this, I mean, and it may be like, how can we possibly create any more of a S storm than what we have created right now? But I think we're going to have to figure out how to do that. And so far, the campaign has succeeded, and it's all about the voices. Like, if you have any doubt, and so we'll always be just giving you guidance from the campaign about who do you need to direct your ire to, and how do you spread the word so that we get people like yourselves who, you have a lot of power in this debate. Because the utilities and the CPUC and to some extent the governor are trying to hide behind this like fake equity argument. And because you folks are literally on the front lines of, alleviating inequity in really, really profound ways, to the extent that you can just pull that moment that's in Annie Hall to just go like, I know more about this than you do because these are the folks I work with, and then organizing the folks who you work with and who you serve to be saying that as well. I can't tell you how powerful you are in this debate. And, so we're just going to have to do that, assuming that that's what is going to come out. And then we'll have like 2 weeks to make that happen. And then, Sean, just to your question, I'll entertain it for a second. If, despite everything we're doing, the CPUC approves a proposal that we think is going to throw the market off a cliff, then, yes, I mean, obviously there's legal options. Obviously, we can go to the legislature. We can do other kinds of things. I am of the mind that it's not worth thinking about that right now. I kind of come from the school of campaigning that just says like, yes, you want to think a little bit ahead, but for the most part, the only thing that matters is the vote that you have right in front of you and the decision maker who is the difference between yay and nay. And I think it's to our benefit if we just kind of focus on things one step at a time.
Fair enough. And I agree as I like a campaigner myself, like intensity in the moment. Strategic thinking, yes, but you have to actually convince people and they're right in front of you. So when you are say yes on batteries, you have some thoughts on, well, it sounds like you were saying 10%. You have a threshold for rate changes of about 10% is what you're saying, a no solar tax, and an encouragement towards batteries because that pairs well as a resiliency option, right? Like batteries, the way that you're framing is like, we have power outages, we should have batteries, maybe also for grid services. But anyway, can you speak a little bit about what is your coalition thinking about batteries?
Yeah, so first off, just to clarify, I use 10% as an example, but that's not our position. The position is solar has to pencil for working and middle class people and those that are trying to deliver solar to working class and middle class people, period. Like, net metering 2.0 we think is eminently fair, but there is a little bit of room around the edges, to tweak with that if somebody wants to. But as far as we're concerned, if it doesn't pencil for your average working class person, forget about it. Like that doesn't work. And so, you know, it's sort of like you show us, you're saying that there's some kind of problem, so give us something and we'll take a look at it. And we can tell you because we have lots of consumer data, but frankly, you should, because we should always be putting the little guy at the center of the whole thing. And so just to clarify, like, you know, don't take my 10% thing literally, but to your question, we should be, first off, we should mostly leave well alone or strengthen net metering in the ways that I was describing so that it works better for renters and for people on the care program. And then with respect to batteries, we could be doing a lot of different things. One is we could be doing net metering for battery exports, which right now we don't do. It'd be one. But then also the states should just do what Arnold Schwarzenegger did 15 years ago. Governor Newsom should just say, I want 1 million solar powered batteries deployed in the next 10 years. And spend like $5 billion basically getting these batteries into people's homes and basements and garages, which of course we know you don't need to spend that ad infinitum. Like the same thing with rooftop solar panels. We spent a bunch of money for 7 years. It drove down the market price so that then the market just took off like a rocket. And so you can do the same thing with batteries. You spend $3 billion, $4 billion. It wouldn't take actually that much in the scheme of it. Get these batteries out there, you know, jumpstart the market, make it so that it's so cheap that most people that get solar pair it with a battery, and then voila, in 10 years, you have kind of what we want, and you get rid of the duck curve, and you get rid of all these kinds of things that like the technocrats like to talk about and get off a cocktail about.
Well, I'm gonna like enhance your narrative there. So this tomorrow, I think it is, we're putting in a grant for vehicle to building and vehicle to grid chargers that we're gonna be installing in low-income housing, hopefully get the grant right. And I think that the rapid electrification of vehicles, because low-income housing tenants want electric vehicles. I hear it from all the asset managers. People want them. I've been traveling around. People already have them. They're running extension cords out their window. He's presenting tomorrow, but he's presented that before. Extension cords, you bet. Low-income folks want these vehicles, and the ability for them to then sell into the grid. We've studied that in Humboldt County and found that you can eliminate a utility bill from selling during certain hours during time of use, the highest value hours. And your electric vehicle is gigantic. You know, like a Golf, like I have, is 37 kilowatt hours compared to a Tesla Powerwall, which is 13. And I get to drive my car, but I can
Right.
plug it in for resiliency.
That's right.
Plug it in for utility bill, you know, just a few hours in the evening kind of thing, just a little bit of sales. And you're like, okay, this is, I think, my fear is that the investor-owned utilities are not going to respond soon enough to vehicle to grid, because this is standard with the F-150 now coming out, their extended range. It's standard already built into Tesla since 2019, just no software release on it. Standard in all the VW vehicles coming out this year that are electric, vehicle to building, like standard now. It's like, so instead of us focusing on batteries, it seems like we should be digging deeper into electrifying vehicles and getting those batteries to be used during the critical hours. And
Yeah. No, I think
I
it's
don't
a
want
good
that to
point.
be the next thing too. Like I'm so worried the utilities are just going to go screw it all up on purpose. So because they're the only ones that get to own the batteries, just like they want to be the only ones that own the solar. So sorry, respond.
Right. Well, no, I mean, when I think of batteries, I kind of think of it, I think that captures your vision of vehicle to grid. In my brain, it does, although I think there's probably some nuances that I'm not appreciating. So, but I'll just say conceptually, this is to me why this whole thing is ultimately a political thing, and it's ultimately a leadership thing. Like we got 1 million solar rooftops because, like the story of how Governor Schwarzenegger, he promised it on the campaign trail because he was trying to distinguish himself from Gray Davis. And then he promptly became governor, and the people that had actually were campaigning for that couldn't even get through to him. It was like he made that promise, and then all of his advisors basically formed a wall around him. But they campaigned and campaigned and campaigned and campaigned. You know, they got a full page ad in the LA Times that, you know, showed him kind of like looking like a Terminator and it was like a joke, but he loved it. Somebody showed it to him and he was like, oh, right, I did make that campaign promise and I am the Solarnator. And so then he sat down with all of his advisors and he said, okay, so I made this campaign promise. And they were all people who were going, no, Governor, that rooftop solar stuff's for the birds. It's really expensive. Only rich people will ever buy it. It's going to be a boondoggle. You're going to be embarrassed. But he had already made up his mind because he's just that kind of person. So as the story goes, he just banged his fist on the table and he said, get me the solar. And that was it. And then everybody was off to the races. And then, you know, the bill passed. The point is just, it was all actually the politics and the campaigning. And the vision of battery storage, the way you're describing it, like there's just wraparound where like you're getting EVs and it's bidirectional and you're using it to both power, get around, but you're also using it to power your home, but you're also using it, you're incentivized to use it as a critical facility that's literally sitting in your garage or driveway to kind of equalize the grid and help your neighbors out, or a power wall if that's what you want. Like a big expansive definition of battery storage, and then doing everything that we can to drive down the price and then do the wiring. It's not going to happen if we just leave it to the CPUC. It's going to happen because basically the guy at the top or the gal at the top is going to decide that it's in their political interest to do so. And it's only going to happen with campaigning around vision and legislation and that kind of thing. And obviously we're clearly 10 steps behind in that we're just fighting to hang on to just rooftop solar. But
Right.
I do think these fights are proxy fights for the kind of distributed vision that you're describing. So that's all I can really say. Like, you know, it's like, yes, and I would love to introduce that bill. And I hope we can do it in a few months if we can win this fight.